Okay, now we are at chapter 12 of the module 5, Rules and Regulations for Financial Advisory Services. Now, chapter 12 is a relatively technical chapter, if I may say so. This is on the revised code of collective investment schemes, right? So the whole chapter is in relation to this particular topic, the code. We call it the revised code. Now, if you look at paragraph 1.1 under introduction, this code is issued pursuant to the Securities and Futures Act, section 321 of the SFA. This code sets out the best practices on management, operation, and marketing of collective investment schemes, generally known as CIS, collective investment schemes, that managers and approved trustees are expected to observe. Right? Note the word expected. Right? Although this is a code, and the code is non-statutory in nature, but if a person fails to comply with any requirement in this code, you note the use of the word requirement, it will not of itself render that person liable to criminal proceedings, although any such failure may, in any proceedings, whether civil proceedings or criminal proceedings, then the MAS or the court may rely on the requirements in the code in order to establish liability or to negate liability, which is the issue or the question in the proceedings. So in other words, although it is non-statutory in nature, it is a code, but it has consequences, like I mentioned a couple of times before during this program. Guidelines and codes do have consequences. Now, 1.3 is quite clear. It says a breach of this code by the responsible person of a scheme, either the manager or the approved trustees, may be taken into account by the MAS in determining whether to revoke or suspend the authorization or recognition of the scheme under sections 286 and 287 of the SFA respectively. Right? So there's this power there for the MAS to revoke or suspend the authorization or recognition of the scheme, or to refuse to authorize or refuse to recognize new schemes proposed to be offered by the same person. Right? In other words, there's a black mark that person may be blacklisted, in that the MAS may not approve any future schemes or any proposed schemes or recognize any such schemes in the future. Now, similarly, a breach of this code by a trustee may be taken into account by the MAS in determining whether to revoke approval granted under section 289 of the SFA, or to prohibit the trustee from acting as trustee for any new scheme. All right, so it's amounting to a bar, a prohibition order, right, to prohibit the trustee from acting as trustee for any future scheme. So therefore, it's important for you to notice that this particular code is important, although it is not statutory in nature. Right, the code has been revised in October 21/8. Right? Now, the revised code was introduced and the revised in order to provide greater clarity and to increase the flexibility for fund managers in managing their funds. Right? So this is the objective of the revised code. The code also aims to enhance safeguards for retail investors, underline that. Right? Retail investors in particular. And MAS will only recognize a foreign scheme if it is satisfied that the scheme is subject to investment guidelines which are substantially similar to those as set out in the revised code. Right? So it's worth your while to pay attention to the requirements under this code if you are advising or if you're recommending products based on the collective investment schemes. Now, 2.2 talks about the key changes introduced. And just, if you run your eye down the page there, it is to strengthen core investment requirements for schemes, including a list of permissible investments for funds, right? Permissible investment for funds. So they give you a list there. It strengthens safeguards on the use of financial derivatives and counterparty requirements. Right? 3, enhanced guidelines on securities lending activities. 4, enhanced requirements for funds investing in structured instruments. So these are the key changes in terms of strengthening core investment requirements for the scheme. Right? There are 4 there. Right? I'll repeat that. Introduce a new list of permissible investments. Strengthen safeguards on the use of financial derivatives, which, as I've said before, these are sophisticated instruments, financial derivatives, and also counterparty requirements. All right, enhancing guidelines on securities lending activities. Bear in mind that we will discuss a bit more. Enhance requirements for funds investing in structured instruments. Now, B talks about introducing new guidelines for specialized fund categories. Right? Underline the word specialized fund categories. The new code, the revised code, I just call the code from now on. The code introduced new concepts of weighted portfolio maturities for money market funds. It also establishes new guidelines for funds which track an index. Right? You'll notice that these are pretty sophisticated stuff. And C there talks about other safeguards to enhance investor protection, including standardizing the methods used to calculate any performance fees imposed. Right? They want to make it more structured, more objective. Introducing principles on the naming of the funds. Right? So there's also this issue of how you name the funds, so that the naming of the funds is not misleading, and also prohibiting the use of simulated past performance data for disclosure of performance figures. Right? So this covers and governs the CIS, the collective investment schemes. Right? Just note the key changes there under 2.2, A, B, and C. Now, coming down the page there, you will see they give you more details. And 2.4 sets out the 10 chapters of the code. Right, chapter 1 all the way to chapter 10. All right, including chapter 10, if you note the heading, schemes offered under the ASEAN CIS framework. Right, so there's a long list of 10 chapters, and we'll try and go through that as soon as we covered this particular chapter. Okay. The 7 appendixes of the code are as follows. Appendix 1 to Appendix 7. Now, as you can see, it covers Appendix 7, Precious Metals Fund. Appendix 6, Property Funds. Appendix 5, Index Fund. Capital Guaranteed Funds, Hedge Funds, Money Market Funds, and the core requirements. Right? So those are the things in the revised CIS code. Now that will give you the comprehensive sweep, as it were, in relation to this particular chapter. Right? So take a look again at 2.4 and take a look at 2.5. Okay. Now let's now go into some of the details of this code. Like I said earlier, we go into the details, and the first one there given to you is the manager under paragraph 3. All right, the following contains in relation to the functions and responsibilities of the manager, what has been extracted from the MAS website. All right, so if you want more details, you can take a look at that website. Now, very quickly, if you look down the box there, there's a big box after 2.1. And you can see under A, records retention, right, in relation to the record of the instructions, if any, to the trustee as to how the votes in relation to investments of the scheme should be exercised. That's in relation to records retention. And B, maintain a record of all soft dollars received. This is similar to the one that we have done earlier. Now then, in terms of transactions, under paragraph C, the manager should transact transactions with related corporations. That's under that particular part. Not invest the monies of a scheme in the manager's own activities, own securities, or securities-based derivative contracts, or those of any of its related corporations, unless the securities are constituents of a scheme's reference benchmark, which is constructed by an independent party, right? And the scheme complies with paragraph 2.3 of Appendix 1. Okay. So there are some guidelines there in terms of Appendix 1, which is at the back of this particular chapter. We'll come to that later. Right? Then, of course, for the avoidance of doubt, they give you some guidelines that this prohibition in the manager's transactions does not extend to schemes managed by the manager or its related corporations. Okay? That's under transactions 1. Right? The manager should transactions with related companies. And then 2, they not lend monies of the scheme to its related corporations. And further that, they give you some guideline. All right? Guidance. Then 3, not to purchase real estate assets owned by the manager or its related corporations for the scheme, unless such purchases are allowed by Appendix 6, property funds. All right? So you need to do a bit of cross-referencing, underline Appendix 6, right? Unless the purchases are allowed under that particular appendix, right? Then you can, otherwise you cannot. Okay? Following down the page, transactions at arm's length, well, that's quite common sense to avoid any conflict of interest. And then transactions consistent with the scheme's objective and approach, well, that's quite clear. Acquire permissible investments and enter into transactions which are consistent within the investment approach and the objective of the scheme, right? The investment objective, investment approach of the scheme. All right, so those are the functions and responsibilities of managers. And following there is the best execution. Right, so that doesn't need any further explanation. It must be prompt. It must be reasonable in terms of price, cost, speed, likelihood of execution and settlement, size, nature, or any other consideration relevant to the execution of a particular trade or a particular transaction. All right, now following down the page there, you get E, arrangement for participants to receive accounts, reports, and statements. All right, then F is important, use of financial derivatives. All right, I just read this to you, very important. Managers should ensure that the risks related to such financial instruments are duly measured, monitored, and managed on an ongoing basis, right? So you're using financial derivatives, it is all the more important for the manager to ensure that the use of financial derivatives is appropriate, right? Now, then use of credit ratings. This is also under the functions and responsibilities of the manager. All right. So if you use credit ratings, you need to be very careful as well. If you make your own credit assessment, to verify the ratings issued by credit agencies. Right. Just do not use the ratings blindly, as it were. Use your own common sense and do your own checking and assessment. Now, in the event of a difference between the ratings issued by a credit rating agency and between such other external ratings, there could be conflict in terms of the rating grade or the rating scale. General managers' internal credit assessments will take the lowest rating should be used. All right, if there are any differences between the rating agencies, all right, and in your own assessment, you also must have your own input as to how the rating agencies do their ratings, and you are required to adopt the lowest rating, right? And for the avoidance of doubt, all ratings used should be based on a rating scale that is globally comparable. All right, independent, professional, globally comparable. And H tells you that when a manager relies on ratings issued by credit rating agencies, the manager should provide the following in the scheme's prospectus, right? A statement that the manager has established a set of internal credit assessment standards and has put in place a credit assessment process to ensure that its investments are in line with these standards. And a statement that information on the manager's credit assessment process would be made available to investors upon request. So all these use of credit ratings must be above board, must be professionally done, right? And there's a guidance following that in relation to 31H2, right, in terms of the statement that the information on the manager's credit assessment would be available to investors upon request. And if that be the case, there should be a clause to say that this information must be kept confidential, right? Now, significant influence, we will touch on that a little bit later, all right? The manager should not, through the scheme, carry its investment activities in a manner which will enable to exercise significant influence over the management on the issuer or permissible investments. Right? This is again an issue of conflict of interest, and then liquidity risk management. Right? So there are guidelines to that as well. Now that covers very quickly the functions and responsibilities of the manager. Right? You can see from our discussion and from what is in the materials in the text here, the functions and responsibilities are pretty heavy. All right, in regard to managing the CIS, managing the fund. Now then quickly at B there, operational obligations, underline the word obligations as well. All right, then on the first, in the box there, payment of redemption proceeds. Right, so redemption request is considered received on day one. And if all is correctly done, then the manager should pay out or cause to be paid out redemption proceeds to the scheme's participants within T plus 7 business days. Right? So this is the operational issues. You have to do that. Now for property funds, the manager should pay out redemption proceeds within the period allowed under the guidelines Appendix 6. Now we have alluded to Appendix 6 property funds earlier. All right? So take a look at that one, and then the redemption proceeds should pay out accordingly to that, to the guidelines in Appendix 6. The hedge funds, the payout redemption process according to its prospectus as required under Appendix 4 of the third schedule of the Securities and Futures Act, the SFR. Right? Proceeds are deemed to be paid on the day the participant's account is credited or a check is mailed to the participant. Right? Just take note of that. And then there's a guidance there referring to an investor who is the beneficial owner of the units of the CIS and excludes a distributor or a central provident fund bank agent. Okay, so that's how they define the end investor. It doesn't include the CPF agent bank or the distributor. Right, then you have also your operational obligations in relation to B, preparation of accounts and reports. All right, do note the timeline given: semi-annual accounts, annual accounts, and semi-annual report and annual report relating to the scheme. All right, and in accordance with Chapter 5 and the appendixes. So those are the operational obligations in relation to the preparation of accounts. Then C, exercising of voting rights. Right? So when the manager a manager may face conflicts of interest exercising voting rights relating to investment of the scheme, and the manager should cause these votes to be exercised in consultation with the trustee. In the event that there are conflicts in relation to the voting rights. Then notification of significant changes. Now, what are significant changes? Right, so they set up for you under D1 to 6, right? D1 to 6, significant changes. And if there are significant changes, then operationally, you have to inform the MAS not later than 1 month. Not later than 1 month. right? Maximum 1 month before the change is to take effect. Right? And then give some examples of what are significant changes. Now take a look at 1D1, investment objective, investment focus, investment approach. Right? All these are considered as significant, where notification must be given to the MAS. B2 reads increase in remuneration payable to the manager or trustee. Right? Or a change in the basis upon which such remuneration is determined. All right. So if there's any changes in that, in pay, the basis of calculation, the remuneration, then you need to inform. That's a significant change. Right? D3 talks about the increase in any other fees payable by the scheme that are substantial. Right? And it's illustrated here for you, fees that have 0.1% or more of the scheme's NAV, the net asset value, or in any fees or charges payable by the participants, unless the trustee certifies that the increase in such fees or changes are not material. All right? If they're not material, then, well, there's no need to notify the MAS. Not later than 1 month. All right? If it's material, 0.1% or more of the scheme's NAV, then operationally, the manager has to inform the MAS. Right, now D4 talks about the amendments to trust deed or prospectus, right, to allow a new form of remuneration or expenses payable by the scheme. Now that would be a significant change. Replacement, removal or appointment of a manager, sub-manager, investment advisor or trustee. Now that is significant and it must be notified. And the 6 talks about a variation in the rights or obligation of participants. All right, if you change the rights or the obligation of the participants in the scheme, then, and if it's material, especially is prejudicial to the participants, then notification must be given. All right, and then following that, they give you 3 sets of guidance in relation to this notification provision. All right. Right, now the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 guidance there. So take a good read at that one to better understand this notification of significant changes. Okay. Another operational obligation is the modifications to the trust deed under paragraph F. Right, now we have mentioned a little bit about this one. So the manager should obtain extraordinary resolution of participants for any modification of the trust deed, unless the trustee certifies that the modification does not materially prejudice the interests of participants and does not release to any material extent the manager from any responsibility to the participants. Right? Unless there's the exception there, then an extraordinary resolution is required. Right? And the change to the scheme or rights obligations of participants, which requires a modification of the trust deed, is necessary in order to comply with applicable fiscal, statutory, or official requirements, whether or not having the force of law. Right? So if there's any requirement to modify the trust deed, then there's no need for this extraordinary resolution. So there are 3 exceptions there, right? One is it does not materially prejudice the interests of the participants and does not release to any material extent the manager from any responsibility to the participant. 2 is when it's necessary by application of law or rule or regulation. And then 3, the modification is to remove obsolete provisions. As time goes by, provisions become obsolete, so to make the thing cleaner and clearer. So you remove obsolete provisions, then that's fine. Or to correct manifest errors. Right? If there are glaring errors in the trust deed, then that can be done. You can correct those errors without having the need to obtain an extraordinary resolution of participants. Right? Then G talks about cash, rebates, and soft dollars. Right? That's G. Then, and give you some details there in terms of soft dollars. All right. Those are quite self-explanatory, so I would want to skip that and go straight to J. Now, J talks about schemes admitted under the CPF investment schemes. Now, take note of J. The manager should not charge any costs arising from CPF failed trades to the scheme. Right? So that is also quite self-explanatory. Now that covers very quickly the operational obligations of the manager in regard to the collective investment schemes. Okay. Now then quickly look at paragraph C. That's under delegation. Right. So in this we are talking about sub-manager. So when a scheme's NAV is sub-managed, the manager should ensure that the scheme is invested in accordance with the code, right? And there are, 1, adequate procedures in place to monitor the conduct of its delegate, i.e. the sub-manager, right? To ensure that the function delegated or outsourced is performed in a proper and efficient and effective manner, right? And 2, controls in place to ensure compliance with the trust deed, laws, and regulations. Right? Now, B is important to take note. When more than 10% of the scheme's NAV is sub-managed abroad, underline the word abroad, the manager should, together with related corporations, already be managing at least 500 Singapore dollars, a million of discretionary funds in Singapore. All right, more than 10% of the scheme's NAV is sub-managed overseas, abroad. I'll repeat that. The manager, together with its related corporations, should be already managing at least 500 million Sing dollars of discretionary funds in Singapore. And the C, in assessing an application for a scheme where more than 10% of the scheme's NAV is sub-managed abroad by another manager, the authority will consider whether the sub-manager is reputable and supervised by an acceptable financial supervisory authority. Right? That's with regard to delegation, where you want to delegate the fund, is the scheme NAV, to a sub-manager abroad. Right? That's paragraph C there. Right? Now, under paragraph D of this chapter 12, investment in other schemes. Right? 3.4 reads, the following contents in regard to investment in other schemes has also been entirely extracted from the Code on Investment from MAS website. So all this under the MAS website. Now the box reads, when more than 10% of the scheme's NAV is invested in other schemes which are registered in a foreign jurisdiction, the manager should, together with the related corporations, already be managing at least 500 million Singapore dollars of discretionary funds in Singapore. Right? It is similar to the issue on delegation to a sub-manager abroad. Right? Right? That means that this manager and his related corporations must be strong enough, right, in terms of the funds under their management, right? At least 500 million discretionary funds in Singapore. Right? Paragraph E talks about payments, right? And A, B, C, well, they are quite self-explanatory. A talks about no payment should be made is unfair to or materially prejudices the interest of any participants or prospective participant. That's quite common sense. The manager should not pay